So we try to figure out the world around us, and sometimes we end up coming up with bad ideas. So are we prone to bad ideas? And if so, why do those bad ideas seem to last for so long?
I think we are not so much prone to bad ideas, but I think that good ideas are hard to come by. That is, to figure out what's true, to figure out what's right, to figure out what's good requires real effort. And throughout human history, look, for most of human history, we had no ideas. I mean, the first philosophers only came about, 2,500, 3,000 years ago in Greece. Before that, we just had primitive forms of religion and all kinds of mysticism. And we tried to explain the world around us, but had no tools for doing it. It's only the Greeks who started asking deep questions about the nature of reality, about the nature of man, about the nature of knowledge and how we come up with ideas. So it's only, we're relatively young in the area of figuring out the world around us. Remember, no other animal does this. We're unique in that sense that we're trying to figure out the world around us. So I think what's sadly happened is that certainly over the last 2,000 or so years, bad ideas have dominated the period. Bad ideas have dominated the period maybe because bad ideas are easier. They require less effort. They're more tuned with a certain intellectual laziness. And they're also connected to religion. Religion creates a certain mental and intellectual laziness. I mean, why make the effort of science and discovery when all the truth is written in a book that was written 2,000 years ago? We don't need to think. So I think when we look today at Gen Z or anybody today, I don't think we fully realize to what extent we're being influenced and are really dominated by this tradition of ideas that has been around us for the last 2,500 years. And, since a lot of the bad ideas have dominated, it's not surprising that the bad ideas dominate now. Now, we're in a fairly good period in history, right? Because they have been good ideas. And I would say from historically, from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, there were some amazing ideas, some very good ideas, some earth-shatteringly good ideas. They didn't have the correct foundation. They weren't fully established, and they were going up against, again, 2,000 years of bad ideas. And that battle, the battle between what you call the Enlightenment and the good ideas of the Enlightenment and the bad ideas of Christianity and a lot of the philosophies and philosophers that were influenced by it, is still going on. It's still the battle, the essential battle. And, young people today are just experiencing exactly the same thing that we experienced when we were young. I mean, we didn't have social media, we didn't have computers, but in terms of ideas that were the same. And the same kind of battle that I think we've been experiencing in the West for the last 200 years. Enlightenment versus anti-Enlightenment ideas. That's the fundamental challenge we have today. To the extent the Enlightenment wins, we progress, we grow, we succeed. The world succeeds to the extent that they are undermined and destroyed. We have bloodshed and mayhem and regression and stagnation.
So how do we distinguish a good idea from a bad idea? Because it seems easy on the surface, but again, when you talk about communism and fascism, which we will get to, those were good ideas to certain people at certain times. It seems like a very subjective thing, like Hitler and Stalin both thought communism and fascism were the best ideas at the time. But obviously now we look back and we see the horrors of it, and we can very easily say those are bad ideas. So how do we tussle with this kind of immediate subjectivity of good ideas versus bad ideas?
Yeah, so the first thing is to reject subjectivism, reject the idea that good ideas and bad ideas depend. It depends on the moment, it depends on the person. It does not. Good ideas or bad ideas can be objectively determined. And when you're talking about these kind of ideas, fascism, communism, capitalism, socialism, whatever, you're talking about ideas that relate to human organization, to how we structure our societies and how we live with each other. And here, the fundamental question has to be, you have to go a few steps backwards in terms of deeper and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? look, if what you're trying to achieve is kill all the Jews, Hitler did, his ideas were good ideas, if that's the standard, right? If what you're trying to achieve is, the death of 100 million Chinese people, then Mao Zedong did a good job, right? So you have to really think about what is the standard. What is the standard by which I measure and I assess good ideas, bad ideas? And I think the only rational standard, given that we are human beings, we're alive, we want to stay alive, we want to thrive and be successful. The standard has to be human flourishing. The standard has to be what ideas lead to human flourishing and what ideas destroy human flourishing. Ideas that lead to human flourishing are good ideas. Now, good for humans, they might not be good for snails, but we're humans. So it's our standard, right? So what leads to human flourishing is good, and what destroys it is bad. Now, you still got problems about defining what human flourishing means and what leads to human flourishing, and how do you, and that's where you need really good ideas to try to figure all that out. But at the very, very fundamental level, you can see that any system that leads to massive death, destruction, economic retardation, poverty, disease, those are not good ideas. Because by the standard of human flourishing, clearly those people aren't flourishing. And generally, ideas that lead to people living lives that they want to live in material abundance, where they can make choices about their lives, that sounds more like flourishing. That sounds like more like the good. So systems that lead to that would be good. And that's how you would evaluate what good ideas and what bad ideas when it comes to politics, when it comes to political systems, when it comes to the way we organize ourselves in societies.
So speaking of bad ideas, what are your thoughts on communism? This is something where I found it incredibly interesting, and we'll talk about communism and fascism a lot in this episode. But what are your thoughts on how people look at communism in a much cozier light in relation to fascism? Is there a moral responsibility bestowed on folks who describe themselves as communist? Like, do they really have the blood of 100 million people on their hands?
If they're defending communism, if they're advocating for communism, then absolutely. Because there's a sense in which by advocating for communism, you're setting the world up for another 100 million people to die. That is, you haven't learned from what's happened. You haven't, judged appropriately, and you are advocating and engaging in advocacy of ideas that are clearly destructive to human life, clearly destructive to human flourishing, clearly destructive to humanity. So you asked me what my assessment of communism is. I think that made pretty clear. Communism is an evil ideology. And as a consequence of being an evil ideology, and we can talk about why it's an evil ideology, it had evil consequences. That is, I believe that good ideologies lead to good consequences and evil ideologies lead to evil consequences. And communism was evil through and through from the beginning, from Marx on. Marx advocated for evil ideas. He was an evil person in that sense, that he advocated for evil ideas he should have known and could have known would lead to the deaths of millions, even if he didn't completely consciously realize it. He should have. If he had been completely rational, if he'd thought it through, he would have realized it. And of course, it did exactly that. It led to exactly the death of millions of people. Fascism is an evil idea that has led to the deaths of millions of people. So fascism and communism are these twin ideas that are very similar in many respects. In their fundamental, essential philosophical nature, they're the same, that have both been unmitigated disasters in human history. And they both find their adherents in the world today. And I think those adherents do bear the responsibility, do have blood on their hands, in a sense that, yeah, they weren't responsible for what happened in the past. But in advocating for ideas that led to that in the past, they are responsible for any blood that happens in the future. And again, they should know it. And the extent that they ignore it, the extent that they evade it, to that extent they're being immoral. And then you asked, I think, why do people have a more sympathetic view of communism than fascism?
Like, why don't people use the same arguments against fascism, against communism as they do with fascism? It seems like what you're
Yes.
saying is they're very unified, but
Yes.
they're completely distinct when we talk about culture, like cultural conversation.
Yes. I think it's because communism is much more like Christianity than fascism.
Okay.
I believe that Christianity, in a sense, is the underlying background ideology off of which the culture is constantly bouncing off, is constantly checking ideas off of, without even knowing it. A lot of communists, they're atheists. They don't really, and yet, and they maybe have never even read the New Testament and don't know who Jesus is or whatever. But it's in the cultural vibe. Christianity has set the cultural vibe. And so communism is much more similar to that cultural vibe than fascism. So fascism seems to violate something, although if you dig deep enough, it doesn't. It's very similar to Christianity, but it violates, and this is the essential. What we've taken out of Christianity, one of the important things that have been taken out of Christianity and have formed the culture vibe, is the notion of egalitarianism. It's the notion that we should all be the same outcome, same everything, right? We should be the same. And to the extent that we're not the same, that those who are less should be elevated and those who are more should be suppressed in order to get us to being the same. And we could talk about historical examples of that. Now, that is a certain interpretation of Christianity that a lot of Christians would reject, but it's part of this cultural vibe. And you know, communism embraces that. That's the whole idea. Fascism doesn't. Fascism embraces hierarchy. Fascism embraces some people as superior to other people, superior, better, morally better, physically better, in every respect better, intellectually better. And we just need to recognize that some people are better than other people, and some people are better at guiding the world, and therefore should be in positions of power over other people. And then if you take Nazism, which is a form of fascism, Nazism says that the hierarchy, these hierarchies that are created, are now hierarchies based on race, right? Based on ethnicity or race or whatever. But fascism basically says some people are better than others, and those people should be allowed to rule over others, right? They should be given power over others. And that power can manifest itself in a variety of different ways. So this idea of hierarchy is something that in our modern world people reject, and people embrace kind of the egalitarianism. Now, both are rooted in Christianity in the end, right? I mean, think about the Catholic Church, full of hierarchy, right? Filled of hierarchy in terms of who is more closer to God and who can communicate with God and so on. But Protestantism, in a sense, rejects that and embraces kind of a more egalitarian. We all can speak to God. We're all the same. And in that sense, fascism is more associated with Catholicism, and I think communism is more associated with Protestantism. But they're all fundamentally Christian. And what do I mean by that? Christian morality, the ethical code that has guided all of our lives for 2,000 years, is a morality of sacrifice. It's a morality of otherism. It's a morality of rejection of the individual and its worth for the sake of God, the collective, the tribe, the group, somebody else. The meek shall inherit the earth, the poor, whatever. Christianity, if you look at the history of Christianity, it's filled with communist experiments. Before there was communism, before there was Marx, you're going back to the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, there were all these communist experiments because it makes sense. We're all created in the image of God. We're all the same. We should all get the same. We should all have the same. The meek are virtuous. It's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. So rejection of wealth. And so Christianity is filled with this, and it has experimented with Christianity throughout its existence. Whereas you could argue the church was, in a sense, trying more hierarchical kind of values, the Catholic Church, and always suppressed these experiments in communism. So you've always had these two tendencies within Christianity: this egalitarianist, communist idea, and this hierarchical, who's more valuable than the next idea. And there always a tension, but they all accept the idea that the individual doesn't fundamentally matter. What matters is God or the group, and that the role of the individual is to sacrifice to God and to the group. And if you think about communism, communism replaces God with the proletarian. It says there's no God, but you should sacrifice to the proletarian. And it even creates in a sense, a kind of a pope. Even though they claim to be egalitarians, they need somebody to tell them what does the egalitarian think? What does the egalitarian, what do the proletarian want? What are the proletarian value? Well, how do we know? There is no such thing as the consciousness of the proletarian. So we need somebody to guide us and to what the proletarian are good for. And that's why you need a Stalin and a Lenin and so on. And again, in that sense, communism devolves into fascism, because at the end, you need to create these hierarchies where people tell you what to do. But it's very much like Christianity in the way it's structured. The Stalin communes with the will of the people, with the spirit of the people. The Pope communes with God. Same basic principle. So I think communism is more popular because it's more egalitarian, and it's more, in some ways, more Christian than fascism. But fascism, just like communism, rejects the individual, demands sacrifice. It might place the state as the group to which we should sacrifice instead of the proletarian, or instead of the God. If it's a Nazi ideology, it might place the race ahead of God or the proletarian. But the one thing that all these ideologies have in common is they reject the value of the individual. The individual doesn't matter. Individual human flourishing doesn't matter. All that matters is some kind of collective well-being, which nobody can measure, and nobody knows what it means, and nobody knows what it really is.
I mean, thank you for that. There was a lot that I have to unpack, but at the end of the day, people, I think, turn to communism not out of critically thinking about it, but in rejection of capitalism. Kind of like if they don't like chocolate, they immediately go to vanilla. And so, can we really blame them for this lapse of thinking? And how do we explain to them that by supporting communism, even through the rejection of capitalism, they're supporting pure evil? How do we have those conversations? Because it seems like people who hate kind of the West and how these economies are working, they immediately want to just flip everything on its head and support communism. I've had many conversations with friends who are full-on communist because they hate what capitalism has done. How do we deal with these conversations? How do we not convince them, but explain to them what they're supporting? Because if they said, I support Nazism instead of capitalism, everybody would be up in arms. But if they say, I support communism instead of capitalism, we kind of just, say, I understand.
Yeah, but that's our failure, because I don't understand. And I don't just say I understand. If somebody tells me I'm a communist, I go, 100 million people, 150 million people, you okay with killing those people? I mean, I don't give them even an inch, even a centimeter. I mean, communism is as evil as fascism, and has killed as many, if not more people, and it needs to be called to the mat. Now, I don't think it's true that people embrace communism because they reject capitalism. First of all, they don't know what capitalism is. They have no clue. Maybe they reject the world as it is right now. But even that they don't do, because if you ask them, what are you rejecting? Are you rejecting your iPhone? Oh, no, I can't do without my iPhone. Are you rejecting your nice condo? Are you rejecting your car? Are you rejecting your Zoom? Are you rejecting the ability to do Zoom? No, I'm not rejecting that, right? So what are you rejecting exactly? They have no clue. So they're not rejecting capitalism. They, a lot of communism's cool. It's different.
Communism is cool. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, it's cool among young pseudo-intellectuals, right?
Huh. Okay. Sorry to interrupt
Right?
you. Yeah, please go on.
So my friends are communists, or maybe I'm communist, or these cool dudes who are like behaving like hippies are communists, and I think that's cool, right?
Like it's trendy.
It's trendy, yeah, in that sense.
Oh, that's disgusting.
No. Yeah, but people join trendy movements all the time. Why are all these kids demonstrating, to bring in another controversial issue, from the river to the sea? They don't know what river, they don't know what sea, they don't know what's in between, and they certainly don't know anything about the history. But it's trendy. It's kind of cool to go join a protest. So they go join a protest. So I don't think a lot of people become communists because they reject capitalism, because they have no clue what capitalism means. And they certainly don't reject the benefits of capitalism. I don't see them going and settling in some communist commune in Africa and living off the land and so on. So maybe they've studied a little bit of Marx, but I don't know how much they understand it, and I know that they don't know kind of just the very simple history of material well-being over the last 300 years, and how much better their lives are today than they were in the past. So it's intellectual laziness to be a communist. I mean, I'd say the first generation of communists was still bad, but at least you could say, okay, it hadn't been tried yet. They were experimenting. They were trying out new things. They were kind of pushing the envelope out there. But God, after the first attempts, whether it's the Commune of Paris, or whether it's the first communes in Europe, or whether it's ultimately the establishment of communism in Russia, okay, get it? Don't you get it? This is a murderous, suicidal, horrific, homicidal ideology. So I don't buy that they're rejecting capitalism. I think that communism is just, again, it's something that people who are ideologically lazy embraced and jump onto. People who don't want to study history, who don't want to figure out where the iPhone actually comes from and what value it presents to their lives. People who are consumed by all the negative in our culture. And I'd add this, look, there's a lot of negatives in our culture, but they're too lazy to be able to figure out where the negatives come from. Mm-hmm. And they attribute it to capitalism, when I would say almost all the negatives in our culture today are caused, from a political perspective, caused by lack of capitalism, by too little capitalism, by the absence of capitalism, right? By the absence of principle. So I think it's that. I think it's that. And again, capitalism is the most anti-Christian ideology possible. So it's something that is in the air to reject, because if our background ideology is Christianity, capitalism is the antithesis of that, in a sense. And why is that? I'll just say in a sentence. The reason it's the antithesis is, again, I said Christianity is all about sacrifice and the group and God and other people's values, not yours. Capitalism is the opposite. Capitalism is about being self-interested. It's about pursuing your own values. It's about pursuing your own happiness. It's about pursuing your own human flourishing. And that just strikes people as, I mean, we have a term for it, selfish, but selfish in kind of the worst negative sense, and we reject it. And if you reject self-interest, if you reject individual human flourishing as a goal in life because it's too selfish, then you're looking for an alternative, and the consistent alternative to self-interest is completely denying, rejecting self, and that's communism.
But can't you have both? Not in the sense of communism, but can't you have individual flourishing, but also not conform, but care about the vitality of the group?
Sure, but only to the extent that the vitality of the group is making your life better. So the framework is always your life. Now, I want to join groups that add to my life, that make my life better. And I want to help those groups become better because that'll help my life. But the standard is my life. So the choice here is not, should I help make the world in which I live better off or not, versus my own self-interest. Those two are compatible. But Christianity and altruism and communism and fascism are not about making the world a better place. They're about your self-sacrifice.
Right.
You, to be moral, to be good, you have to be worse off. Maybe the best example of this in the end is a suicide bomber in the slum, right? Because literally to be virtuous, to be good, you have to kill yourself, right? As long as you kill other people in the process, right? That makes you good. But take it to a lesser extent, under communism, which is the same as this kind of suicide bombing, right? In order to make society better, I need to repress my own desires, my own whims, my own wishes, my own values, my own mind, my own thinking. Only then can society be better. That's what communism demands of you. It demands of you the subjugation of your knowledge, your thinking, your reason, your rationality to the whim of the group. And that is downright evil. And that is, so the choice here is not between, should I help other people? Should I help myself and other people? Or should I only help myself? I mean, if you help yourself, then you want to help other people. Some people, not all people, right? Some people are harmful to you. You don't want to help them. You want to help some people because that rebounds back to you. You gain benefit from it. But the standard by which you evaluate what's good or bad is you. Your own life. That's capitalism. That's essential, the essence of capitalism. And note that by the standard of human well-being, capitalism produces the iPhone, the abundance of food, the abundance of everything that we have today. And and in spite of that, it's condemned by a philosophy that claims that what they care about is the good for society, the good of the group. But the good of society and the good of the group, if you measure it, seems like capitalism is the best system. And the thing is that ultimately what they want is not the good of anything. What they want is your sacrifice. What they want is you to be worse off. That's why, Mother Teresa's the ideal, right? She gives up everything and she helps out the poor, but we don't even measure her goodness by how many people she helped. We measure her goodness by how much she gave up in order to achieve the little help she provided people.
So I wanted to ask afterwards why you think Gen Z get attached to the ideas of communism, but now I want to kind of broaden that question to why do you think Gen Z get attached to this self-sacrifice in accordance with the group? Because it seems like, as you were talking about in terms of the protests that are going on now, in terms of the political polarization that's going on now, Gen Z are kind of leading this charge on social media and the like, as we were talking about before, or at least I was saying, propagating messages that they don't fully understand, that they don't maybe fully agree with, that maybe fully not be true, but they're still just putting it up, spreading the message, regardless of if they understand it, regardless of if it's true. Why are young people so unable to critically think about these things? Because all of the information is there. You have many interviews talking about this. There's a lot of great critical thinkers teaching you these things, but young people for some reason are like not vigilant at all, not aware at all. They just go ahead.
I mean, I think that's true of every generation, so I don't think this is true of Gen Zs particularly. Gen Zs might be worse, and they might be worse for one main reason, and that is I think that the education they got was worse. I think the education you're getting in schools just is deteriorating. It's getting worse. So you talk about critical thinking. I don't think thinking is something that's really emphasized. I think your generation and younger generations have been taught to emote, to connect with their feelings, to be one with your emotions. I mean, that's great, but that's not what you need in order to thrive in this world. What you need is to be able to think. What you need is knowledge and the ability to use that knowledge, which requires thinking. I think a lot of young people today are being taught that subjectivism. They've been taught that whatever their emotions lead them, that is good, that is right. They've been taught that good things should just happen to them because they want good things to happen, and not because they've earned those things. I remember a student getting up in one of my Q&As at the University of Texas a few years ago saying, why should I go to work after college? I don't want to work. Why can't I just do my thing, and have the government just give me a check every month?
Sounds like
It
Gen
was
Z.
like, and I was like blown away. I mean, he was serious. This was not a joke. It was just serious. I just want to hang. Why can't the government just advise me hanging? And why do I have to work? What's the point of work? And it's like they've been taught that there's a sense in which the most important thing in the world is their desires, their whims, their emotions.
Hmm.
Reason, reality, where this money is going to come from. Why should other people work for them? Why are other people their slaves in a sense? They want to hang and somebody else has to work for their food. That's just, it's not even conceivable. It doesn't even come into their mind, right?
Yeah.
They don't think about it because they've just taught, and I think our educational system teaches this, that their whims are primary. And then when they go to college, what are they taught in the humanities, at least? What are they taught? They're taught this nonsensical, again, that everything is a question of oppression and oppressed and intersectionality and who is suffering and who is. It's all this altruism. It's all this idea of sacrifice, right? You're good if you sacrifice. You're bad if you somehow do well in life. That means you've exploited other people, right? That's exploitation theory and post-colonialism and all this nonsense that have really taught people to internalize this altruism, internalize this idea that what's good is, sacrifice, and what's evil is success, achievement, prosperity. Why do people hate capitalism? Because they look at capitalism and they see some people under capitalism do really, really well, and other people don't. And they go, that's not fair. And of course, the right answer to that is, why isn't it fair? That's exactly what fairness demands. Some people work hard. Maybe they're smarter. They're more productive. They produce more. They create more. They have more. Other people maybe are lazy. Maybe they're not lazy. Maybe they're just not that smart, but they produce less value in the world out there. They have less. That's the definition of fairness. You get what you deserve. So, but they reject that, and they embrace an egalitarian view of fairness. Fairness means sameness, but we're not the same. We're all different. And to reject the idea that we're all different is to reject reality, to reject fact, and that's what they've been taught, because that's the essence of this whim worshiping and this ideology driven by whim that I think so many young people have embraced.
So two things. Number one is, how do we get young people out of this method of thinking? Because it is going to be, if they were nurtured from such a young age to only care about their emotions and think of their whims as primary, it's not a light switch. It's going to take a lot of work to get them, thinking about reality and critically thinking about reality and critically thinking about thinking. Metacognition is one of those, it's hard to acquire but invaluable skills. But before we talk about that, what did you say to the guy at UT Texas, or University of Texas, when he was saying, I just want to hang, I want the government to pay for all of my things? And also, can you double click on the not slave mentality that you mentioned, but you were saying that there are people going to be making his food and everything.
Yep.
He hadn't even gone that far. He's just, again, only thinking about what he wants.
I mean, it's the government. The government just has money, and they send him money. What's the big deal? And he can't conceive of where that money comes from. And if they don't have enough, maybe they can print more and just send him the money. So, I mean, first of all, I expressed how blown away I was by the question, right? Like, I'd never heard this question before. I didn't know people were this detached from reality and this demanding, and this, it just blew my mind. So then I broke it down for him. I said, so what you're saying is you want to live off of me. You want to take my money so that you can hang. Mm-hmm. And how are you going to take my money? Because I don't really want to feed you, right? I don't like you, and I don't want to feed you. So how are you going to take my money? Well, the only way for you to take my money is to come and steal it. Now, you don't want to do that directly. You don't want to actually come and make the effort. I actually have more respect for thieves than I have for you, because thieves would actually go into the effort of stealing my money. You don't want to do that. You have found a much better mechanism, and that's hire other thugs, not even pay them, just give them a cut of the proceeds, right? Hire thugs to come and steal my money. They get to keep a portion, and you get to have the rest. And you call this democracy and you call this, right, the political system, but you basically are hiring the government to steal my money so that you can hang.
Mhm.
Why is your hanging more important than, I don't know, the nice gift I want to buy my wife with that money, or the extra books I want to buy my kids, or a better education that I want to buy my kids, or to pay for my surgery, or whatever you want to use the money for? Why is that? Why am I denied the use of my money so that
But
you can hang?
But Dr. Brook, again, not to put you on the spot, but we
Sure.
just talked about individual flourishing. We want people to be selfless, but then he's trying to be selfless, and we're saying, you
No, I
know,
don't want anybody to be selfless. Selflessness is the root of all evil.
oh, sorry, selfish rather. We were
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about, we want individual
yeah,
flourishing. We want
yeah.
people to be selfish with their time, and they
Uh-huh.
don't conform to the group, whatever that group is, whether it's God or whoever. But now he wants to be selfish, but now we're
Not
saying,
being selfish.
okay,
That's not being selfish. So the two alternatives in life are not to sacrifice or to be selfish. There's lots of other alternatives. One of those other alternatives, a big alternative, is to be self-destructive. What he's being is self-destructive. To be selfish means to live as a human being. It means to live to the full potential of what it means to be human. And what does that mean? It means using our mind in order to figure out how to survive, how to thrive, how to create the values we need to consume, we need in order to live by. So a selfish human being wants to be productive, wants to find a job to pay for his meal, doesn't want to live off of other people. He doesn't want to be a parasite or a leech off of other people. He wants to be productive because he realizes that, and that's where he gets his self-esteem. I think all of us get our self-esteem from the work we do. And self-esteem is crucial for a successful, flourishing, happy life, because it's that sense that we belong, that sense that we belong on this earth, that we can deal with the world. We can deal with the world. We can survive on this world. This kid is never going to have that because he's always going to live off of other people. He's always never going to know, can I actually survive in this world? Am I a good enough human being to actually be able to live and thrive? All I'm getting are these handouts, and he'll never achieve anything. We know people who just live on handouts, they're not going to achieve anything. To achieve something, you have to really produce something. You have to create something. You have to build something. He doesn't want to do all that. He just wants to hang. So being selfish is very demanding. Being selfish is hard work. Being selfish for Ayn Rand, and we can talk about Ayn Rand, but for Ayn Rand, being selfish means to be rational in every aspect of your life. So it's the opposite of the mentality of what they're teaching you in school today. It's the opposite of whim worshiping. It's the opposite of going by emotion. This is about figuring out for everything that you do, is this good for me? Is this going to lead to my flourishing, to my success? And how do I know? Well, I'm a certain animal. I have certain characteristics. I have a certain consciousness, human consciousness. What does that mean? What does that imply? How does reason work? How does rationality work? And then applying that to the day-to-day decisions that I make in life. So to be selfish is very demanding. And he was being, intellectually and materially super lazy. He wants other people to run his life. That's the opposite of selfishness. That's to be selfless. That's to deny the self. The self is your mind, not your feelings.
right. And so how do we, before we move back to communism and fascism, but how do we get these people, because he's not an N of one case. He's
No.
you know,
No.
a lot of people think very similarly. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And a lot of Gen Z in particular have grown up with this mentality, not just from their education, but from social media. Like social media puts them in a bubble, gives them all of the content that makes them feel good. And so their brains are trained in a very serious way and unfortunate way to only respond to the world as social media portrays it, which means that they only respond to a world where they feel comfortable in.
Yep.
And so how do we get these people to critically think, to induce metacognition?
So first of all, it's very hard. It just is very hard because they've been conditioned like this since they were very young. And you're right, social media just reinforce. I think that you're probably mostly going to fail through college because they live in this bubble and their professors are reinforcing it,
Mhm.
right? With all this woke, politically correct, postmodern philosophy that they're getting, it's just being reinforced. And if it's not being forced that way, then even if they go on the right, then they're getting kind of a similar reinforcement of the same kind of values, just with a right wing spin, kind of a fascist spin. But so I think the hope starts when they leave college, and now they actually have to engage with life, and they have to get a job, and mostly they have to show up on time, and they have to actually work,
Mhm.
and suddenly reality is right there in front of them, and their wishes don't matter anymore, right? I mean, their wishes, their whims don't matter. This is what they have to do if they want to earn a living, if they want to eat. They can go on welfare even. Welfare is not indefinite, but welfare doesn't give them the kind of lifestyle they really would like. So they might be miserable for a while, and they might blame the capitalist, they might be against the man. But the reality is they have to go through this process of actually engaging with reality. We all do. That, for a lot of them, for the more honest ones, makes them rethink the fantasy that they have in their youth. Now, unfortunately, for most people, what that does is it makes them cynical.
Mhm.
So what happens is they say, all right, I guess communism doesn't work. I've studied a little bit of history. Yeah, people die. And yeah, I mean, just getting my whims is not going to happen, sadly. I just have to drudge through this capitalist stuff or this market stuff, and that's just the way it is. And they become cynical and skeptic, and they abandon all ideals. And I think that's sad because they grow up not to be particularly happy people. And I think that's an overwhelming majority of people are like that, not just Gen Zs, but broadly. But that's the time, I think, right after college is probably the best time to engage with them with better ideas. Look, guys, there is a path to happiness and flourishing and success. You can be an idealist, but to do that, you actually have to take your life seriously. And you actually have to want to live a good life. And you have to be willing to put in the effort to achieve a good life. And here's some basic principles, right? Here's some basic ideas on how to view that. And, you have to stop with this emotionalist, follow your whims. You have to focus on, reality, on reason, on rationality. You have to set goals. You have to choose values. You have to be ambitious in your life, ambitious about life, not just ambitious about a career. And I think at that point you can start connecting that to reality. Look what happens when people are successful. Look at these role models. I don't know, successful entrepreneurs, for example, who've done amazing things and have had these huge achievements, changed the world, made the world a better place, and made their own lives incredible, right? All at the same time, which always goes hand in hand, right? You can't become a billionaire unless you make the world a better place. That's just in a market economy. That's just the reality. So that's an opportunity when they, for the first time in their lives, they're independent and they encounter reality, not school. School's not reality. They encounter reality. That's the opportunity. There's cognitive dissonance going on there. That's the opportunity to actually bring forward better ideas. And the fundamental is to teach them, is to show them how to think, to show them that thinking is what matters.
Mhm.
And then you can get to the meta issues of introspection, of thinking about how you're thinking and what are the right methods of thinking. But first, you have to show them that that's what matters. That's what's important.
And so I think this is where the exploitation theory comes in full force because they get cynical. They can't rely on, the capitalistic system. They can't rely on the government to support them. They can't rely on their emotions. And so they say, oh, if somebody has more than me, then they must have done something unfair. They must have done something unjust. They must have done something else, and it's unfair.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is like 100 years ago, the same thing was happening, right? People have different amounts. Some people were laborers and some people were successful entrepreneurs, and people had nice cars and people didn't have cars at all. And some people had nice horses and other people didn't. And yet in America, at least, this envy, this resentment, this hatred of people who had this idea of exploitation didn't exist. It just didn't exist.
Mhm.
It was rare and unusual. The American spirit was always That guy's richer than me. I want to become rich. I don't want to become rich as him necessarily. I want to do the best that I can do. I want to provide my family with the best that I can provide my family. The focus was on being the best you could be as an individual. It's only, I think, in the last 40 years or so, 50 years, that people are starting to focus on, oh, I want to hurt the other person because he has more than me. I want to pull him down to my level rather than me be the best that I can be. I want to make him the worst that he can, worse than he is. And that's the ideology. That's the Marxism. That's the postmodernism. That's the focus on emotion rather than on reason. And one of the things that we have to teach people is the fundamental nature of reality of trade, of a free society is win-win. The reality is that when somebody else is better off, you're better off too, because they can't get better off without making you better off. So how does Steve Jobs become a billionaire? By making something like this, which benefits my life. If it didn't benefit my life, I wouldn't buy it. If it didn't benefit billions of people's lives, they wouldn't buy it. And if they wouldn't buy it, Steve Jobs wouldn't be a billionaire. So the only way he can become a billionaire is by making my life better off, and that's consistent. Every one of successful entrepreneurs in any industry is only going to be successful to the extent that he makes other people better off in some way or another, and they're willing to pay therefore for his product, right? So teaching people the win-win nature of trade, the win-win nature of freedom, the fact that his gain is not my loss, but we want to create a situation where we maximize win-win relationships, trade relationships, and that requires freedom, that requires capitalism, that requires getting not viewing myself as being exploited. If you go to work and you're working a job, how much you're getting paid based on how productive you are. And if you're very productive, you get paid more. If you're less productive, you get paid less. And there's nothing more fair than that, because you're getting paid relative to what you're producing. And those are the kind of ideas that people need to grasp. But to do that, they have to get rid of the focus on emotion as the primary driver of their being, and start thinking and start really evaluating facts of reality and thinking about how the world actually works.
Exploitation theory also has links into communism.
Of course. I mean, this is an idea that Karl Marx came up with, right? The worker is exploited, and the manager and the capitalist exploits the worker. But anybody who studied a little bit of economics or has been in business for a little bit knows that that's complete bonkers. It's just wrong.
I'm very uncomfortable asking you the second question. I guess I'll start with, do you think Marx really knew the consequences of his ideas? Do you think, because you said earlier that if he rationally thought about these things, he would have come to the conclusion that these are very bad ideas. So either he did come to the conclusion and he still chose to put these ideas out, or he just didn't rationally think of it, or he was ignorant about it.
Look, all I can say about Marx, because Marx advocated for some pretty horrible things. He advocating for genocide because he claimed that certain peoples, I think it was the people from the Balkans, weren't suited for the proletarian and therefore had to be eradicated, right? And he writes this to Engels in some of their letters. So Marx held really, really nasty ideas. He held nasty ideas about Jews. I mean, horrible ideas about Jews. You can find that in his essay on the Jewish question. And then he held completely wrong ideas about production, about how production is happening, that if he had just made the effort to go and actually look and examine and think about, he would have discovered are completely wrong. And then if he thought through the logical consequences of the movement towards communism, and of course he's very vague about how we get from the dictatorship of the proletarian to the utopia that he advocates. There's no real path, right? It's just that's where it headed. And then his whole historical materialism is bizarre. But if he had thought it all through, it's not that hard to discover and to figure out that this would lead to disaster. And I don't think he minded the disaster if you consider the fact that he thought that whole people should be wiped out because they didn't fit into his utopia. So no, I think Marx is evil. I think he held evil ideas. I think the ideas were evil, could be discovered as evil even by Marx himself if he'd given the effort and had acted rationally. And the fact that he didn't is part of what makes him and his ideas evil. The logical consequences are not that hard to figure out. And I think anybody today over the age of 30 who is of average intelligence and above, who is a communist, is evil. They're evading reality. They're ignoring the consequence of this ideology, and they are morally contemptible.
A lot of people, unfortunately, think that there is something to learn from Marx and from communism in general. And then this is a very uncomfortable question to ask, but in the same breath, do you think that there's also something to learn from Hitler in this way? Like, if people, as we were talking about, they don't think of fascism and communism as the same thing, even though they are very similar.
Yeah, but I don't accept the premise. I don't accept that there's anything positive to learn from Marx. I mean, the only reason to read Marx is in order to understand all the mistakes and all the horrors that have come from his ideas. Mm-hmm. There's nothing new that you will learn from Marx. There are no good ideas in Marx that you couldn't get from other people during that period. I mean, Marx made some good observations about the nature of capitalism and so on, about positive ones about how good it was. I mean, I wish Marxists understood that today. But other people were writing the same thing. So anything that was new to Marx was terrible, awful, horrible, not of value. It's certainly true of Hitler. Hitler said nothing positive, nothing new, nothing good, nothing of value. Even if you could argue that his condemnation of socialism and communism, he was right on certain things. Yeah, other people said that. There was nothing unique about Hitler in his critique of communism or socialism. But in any idea that was uniquely Hitler's, that was new, or any idea that was uniquely Mussolini's, fascism, they were wrong. And there was zero value in them. There was nothing of value in communism, and there was nothing of value in fascism. They are both ideologies that, again, lead to nothing but death and destruction and should be condemned. People should, I mean, I don't say you should stop studying them, but you stop taking them seriously as legit sets of ideas to live by. They should only study them as these historical curiosities in terms of white people would ever buy into this and white people would ever take any of this nonsense seriously.
Speaking of Mussolini, I remember in your conversation with Lex Friedman and Michael Malice, you and Michael Malice were talking about Mussolini as kind of like, I don't want to say intellectual, but maybe he was a different kind of person than Hitler or Stalin. Could you say more about that if you remember the line of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that he was. I mean, he was less of a brute than certainly Stalin was or Hitler. He was more of a intellectual. Doesn't make him less. He was just as evil in many respects. I mean, they were more evil. They were much more concerned about eradicating people and killing. Mussolini maybe hadn't reached that stage yet in his success, but he wasn't yet committed as much to just killing people. He was horrible and awful and evil, but he never reached the level of evil of a Hitler or Stalin. And Hitler, you could argue, was somewhat intellectual in a sense of, he wrote a book. He came up with this ideology, Nazism. I mean, he put together a lot of ideas that were out there into this one ideology. He was obviously, I don't get it, but he was obviously very charismatic. People, and so was Mussolini. Mussolini basically started out as a socialist, and he figured out, I mean, his transition, basically a support of communism, socialist type. And he figured out that the problem was that, he still agreed with the outcome of of socialism. But first of all, I think he rejected like the historical determinism of Marx. And the second thing he figured out that people it wasn't just going to happen. The proletarian were not just going to rise up. And there wasn't this just proletarian consciousness that was dictating the future, that people needed to be guided. So his, call it contribution, I mean, it's a negative contribution, but his idea was, yes, I'm still for the worker. I still hate capitalism. I still reject capitalism. But in order to achieve socialist ends, we need a strong arm of government. Mm-hmm. And at least for a while, we need the capitalists, we need the entrepreneurs to keep doing what they're doing because they generate results, right? Now, they need to be doing what they're doing under the guidance and authority of the state. And that's the innovation of fascism. Fascism is, if communism and socialism are, the state owns the means of production, right? That's essential. The state owns and therefore manages and controls the means of production. Then fascism, you think you own the means of production, you individual people, but we will control them. So we give you a we have the pretense of private ownership, yet through regulations and controls, we basically tell you exactly what to do and how to run things. And that's the innovation that is fascism that Mussolini came up with. He also, it's also authoritarian. It's also, there's one leader. He wanted to reestablish the Roman Empire, and he was going to be the emperor, of course. But it's Nazism that brought in the racial element to it. With Mussolini, it was basically the state controls the means of production. The state controls your life. The state guides how you should live your life. And you should sacrifice for the state or the empire, however you want to call it. And in many respects, that has endured, right? If you look at America today, America is much more fascist than it is communist, because what we have today is a life where we all think we have private property. Try not paying your property taxes, and then you'll find out that the property is not yours. You're basically just paying rent to the government, call it property taxes, but they own the property. Or try chopping down a tree in your backyard, and you'll discover the California Coastal Commission or whoever coming and telling you, no, you're not allowed to use your property to chop down trees because it's really our property and we get to decide who gets to chop down what. Or if you run a business, try, discovering a new cure for cancer and releasing it to the public. And then suddenly the government steps in and says, no, you can't do that before we, the government, have approved it. That is all much closer to fascism, where they control you, where they dictate how you live your life, but give you the pretense that you own something and that you have some freedom, right? But they really don't. So we're not full on fascism, but we're definitely leaning more towards fascism than we are towards communism.
Do you think human nature was represented at all in Nazism or Stalinism? It's again an uncomfortable question to ask, but
yeah, I mean, it's easy to answer, and the answer is no. These are both ideologies, all ideologies, that are fundamentally opposed to human nature. Human nature, I like Aristotle's definition of human beings as the rational animal. Our nature is to be rational. Now, we fight that nature constantly, sadly, partially because we have bad ideas, and we've had bad ideas from the beginning, and to live up to our nature is an effort. It takes energy. So every other animal lives based on its nature automatically. It's coded into their genes. Our genes leave us the option to write our own software, if you will. They leave up the option to decide whether we're going to live up to our nature or not. Mm-hmm. And it takes effort. It takes energy exertion to live up to our nature. It takes choices. It takes real choices to live up to our nature. And what communism and fascism do is they take advantage of the fact that so many people never do that, never live up to what it is human. Indeed, communism and fascism are philosophies for animals. The philosophies for anti-humans, that is for human beings who have not reached the human level. The human level is the thinking level. Communism and fascism are sub-thinking, are pre-thinking. Ayn Rand calls it preconceptual. They're before you start being a conceptual animal where you're thinking about thinking, right? Where you actually can think, where you actually are dealing with abstractions. They appeal to the animalistic tendencies within us. So they appeal to the idea of dog eat dog, right? And the hierarchy of so-called the animal kingdom. I'm going to eat, I'm going to eat you, or I'm going to eat the food before you can eat the food. Human beings, think about the amazing thing about capitalism. And this is human nature. We trade. And we trade in transactions that are win-win. We're both better off when we trade. No other animal has that. No other animal can actually trade. For animals, the world is a zero-sum game. If I eat the zebra, you don't eat the zebra. But human beings can hunt a zebra. I can hunt a zebra, trade half of the zebra for furs that you might have. I get a fur, you get half the zebra, and we're both better off. That is uniquely human. That is essentially what capitalism is about. And that is anti-communist and anti-fascist. That is the suggestion that we all can benefit from each one of us pursuing our own self-interest and each one of us being rational. So again, communism and fascism are animalistic. They have a zero-sum world view of the world. They have a violent view of the world, and they have a materialistic. That's the other aspect of it. Both are materialistic. We are determined by our genes. We are determined by our economic situation. We as individuals have no free will. Capitalism implicitly rejects that idea. No, you determine your own fate. You get to make decisions. You get to make choices about what kind of life you're going to live. And that's all that matters, is the decisions you make for yourself.
So let me turn the question on its head, because it seems like capitalism has all of these benefits. What are the detriments to capitalism in your view? I mean, we talked about, you were talking about how there are some negative effects caused by a lack of capitalism or an absence of capitalism. But what are the real detriments of capitalism that you see? Maybe we can understand why people look at these negative effects. And I know you disagree with this, but loosely and superficially turn to communism.
There are none. There are none. Right? Now, people perceive detriments. Some people get richer faster than other people. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets richer, but not at the same speed. Now, is that a detriment? I don't think so. But you can see that from an egalitarian perspective, that looks like a detriment. It's also true that in the early days of capitalism, it looked pretty ugly. So I can understand early on in capitalism that people weren't sure, is this a good thing or not? What's going on here? Because a lot of people who were dying on their farms, but their death was far away and we couldn't see it, were now coming into the cities and not dying anymore. They were now living, but they were living what looked like horrible lives, like Charles Dickens' stories, right? Horrible lives. Now, the fact that those lives were better than the lives they were living in the farm, because on the farm, many of them were dying, and life sucked generally. You didn't have that comparison, so people couldn't conceive of it. But we, looking backwards and looking at history and looking what happened, capitalism is an unequivocal, unquestionable, massive success. It's the only success in all of human history in terms of economics. Certainly in terms of human wealth and human longevity and human health and human well-being. The only successful period in all of human history has been the last 250 years where we've had a little bit of capitalism. And the other problem is we've never really had capitalism in its pure form. Now, that's interesting because the communists say the same thing. We've never really had. This is the difference. In communism, every time you try to approach a pure form, everybody dies. There's death, starvation, destruction. With capitalism, anytime you get to closer to the pure form, everybody thrives. people do really, really well. And the closer you get, the more they thrive. So what we need is to go all the way, and we haven't gone all the way. So, for example, people are concerned about the environment. Capitalism has solutions for the environment if you actually have real private property and you do it consistently and thoroughly. There's solutions to almost all the problems people claim to have with capitalism that are real, but we've never really tried them because we've never been willing to go all out on capitalism. And the problems are minor as compared to any problems that you might have from communism or fascism. So the mixed economy, which is what we have today, some capitalism, some fascism, some communism, some elements of all of them, is far better than communism or fascism and far inferior to more capitalism.
I understand what you're saying. And, the place that capitalism has really thrived, obviously, is in the United States of America. We are very close to a very pivotal historical moment in U.S. history in November. But do you think
I think it's overrated. I mean, it's not that pivotal. It's not that historical. The reality is, I don't think so. We've got two statist candidates, from who are anti-capitalist, but neither one is a communist, and neither one is really an ideological fascist. Mm-hmm. Both of them will lead us towards more fascism. Maybe one faster and one slower, but it's not like, I think Trump is a unique candidate in the sense of his just complete disregard for the American political system. But I don't think that he represents capitalism or anything good. And I don't think Kamala represents anything good. So they're both just really bad. And we're drifting towards greater and greater statism. And maybe one of the candidates leads us there faster. I think Trump does, but you could think the other way around as well. But it's not pivotal in the sense that it's not dramatic. There's not like a choice between freedom and slavery, communism or capitalism or fascism and capitalism. There's no capitalist candidate on the table. There's no even semi-capitalist candidate on the table. There's no even semblance of capitalism on the table. Indeed, both political parties have rejected any semblance of freedom at all. I mean, the Republicans used to pay lip service to capitalism. They don't even do that anymore.
So I'm going to ask then, because my question was, is America moving towards fascism wholesale? It seems like you answered yes. I'm going to ask two questions that are on opposite ends of the aisle. So what would a pro-capitalist politician or candidate look like? What do you think that they would want? How do you think that they would move America forward in that way?
Well, first, they would advocate for capitalism, which means for freedom. And what does that mean? That means they would advocate for dramatically shrinking our government, massively cutting government spending and eliminating government agencies and regulatory agencies and departments of government, all based on one principle, and this is the principle of capitalism. The principle of capitalism is the protection of individual rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's in our Declaration of Independence. I wish somebody would take it seriously. But that is what government is there for. It's to protect those rights. And what that requires is a police, a military, and a judiciary. It means a complete separation of state from economics. Now, I don't expect anybody to come and say, we're going to shut down the government except for police and military and judiciary. Not yet. But move in that direction. I want to privatize Social Security. We have to completely reform Medicare and bring it back to individual responsibility. We have to completely stop all subsidies to businesses. Government should have no business in business, but we should also shrink dramatically the regulatory state. And ultimately, we have to reform welfare and phase it out so that we're not redistributing wealth for that kid, so the kid can't go and just hang at somebody else's expense, right? So a capitalist candidate is one who would argue for moving towards a separation of state from the economy. But that means you also should have the freedom. We should have freedoms to use our bodies any way we want to, and that includes the freedom to have an abortion, the freedom to take whatever drugs or medicine we want to take, to do with ourselves what we like. So it's not left and right in that sense. I embrace a lot of the freedoms some of the freedoms that the left embraces, and some freedoms that the right embraces, although very few these days, but generally freedom. Leave us alone. Jefferson said, I think I'm paraphrasing, if my neighbor doesn't have his hand in my pocket, it's none of my business what he does in his home, right? So it's not the government's business who I have sex with and who I marry and, who I interact with and who I have a contract with, and that's my business. So stay away from it. So both left and right are wrong. A pro-capitalist candidate would be for individual liberty, individual freedom.
And on the opposite side, what would a fascist America look like? More of what we already have, or would it be something that Americans really have never tasted, have never really seen before?
I mean, a full-blown fascist America would be different. I mean, it would do away with elections, or at least do away with real elections. Maybe you still have the pretense of election, like Russia or somewhere like that. You'd have a strongman. I think American fascism would be very patriotic, a lot of flags. I think it would be religious. I think there'd be a lot of crosses with the flags. So,
and you also said on Lex's interview, environmentalist.
Yes, I think you'd have to wrap that up. I think Americans tend to be very pro-environment. I think there's so if you could find a candidate who could wrap up religion with patriotism, with environmentalism, I think you could get real power in this country, sadly. But yes, controlling people's lives using environmentalism or nationalism or religion in one way or another, I think that is kind of the fascism we're heading towards. And it would be authoritarian, and it would be ugly. It would be very ugly.
Oh, God, that's horrifying. Okay, yeah. We've gone down the darker routes. Let's turn to Ayn Rand.
Sure.
Someone that I think you really like, someone that you've recommended a lot. Should Gen Z read Ayn Rand, and what should they keep in mind while reading her books?
Yeah, everybody should read Ayn Rand. I mean, Ayn Rand, I think, is the most important thinker of the last 150 years, or really over the last 2,000 years. I think since the Greeks, she's probably the most important thinker out there. I think she completely changes the paradigm, the philosophical paradigm under which we live. She opens your eyes to reality, to the world. People talk about red pilling and blue pilling and black pilling or whatever. But this is the real pill. It basically is reality. Focus on reality, what's really out there, and your own nature as a human being. So I highly recommend reading her, whether it's reading her novels, or The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, and reading her nonfiction, books like The Virtue of Selfishness, or Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, or Philosophy, Who Needs It. These are the kind of books that I think are life-changing. I would encourage people to read them with an open mind. These are books that challenge everything you believe in. They challenge everything the culture holds dear. And they're really revolutionary. This is real. If you want to be really revolutionary, this is where the real revolution is. It's a philosophical revolution. They're deep, but that's why I encourage people to read the novels, because the depth, the philosophical depth, is conveyed through stories.
So, in terms of like an immediate perspective for any Gen Z listening, what would Rand say that Gen Z might immediately appreciate, immediately understand, immediately kind of take home with them and inspire?
Well, I mean, she'd say you should use your mind, you should use your reason, you should use your mind to live the best life that you can for you in this life, because there is no other. So you should dedicate your life to making the most of your life, using your mind as the guide, because that is your only real tool of cognition. Emotions are wonderful. We experience life through our emotions. It's how we experience life. It's great, but that's not a tool of cognition. It doesn't tell us what's right and what's wrong, what's true, what's false. So use your mind to live a great life for your own happiness, for the purpose of your own happiness in this world.
And Dr. Brook, this has been just a fascinating and incredible conversation. So I thank you so much. One last question for you.
Sure.
Gen Z are eventually going to get into government. They're going to use all of the ideas that have been propagated and curated to build governments and maintain governments in certain ways. How do you think Gen Z can build better government and right the wrongs of history?
Well, I mean, they need to read Ayn Rand and need to take ideas seriously. They need to go back to the Enlightenment, go back to the founding fathers of America. If you really want to be inspired about government, then read the founding fathers, and read the Federalist Papers and the debates they had among them, each other about the role of government and the place of government. Read what they said in the Constitutional Convention and how they thought about government. These were giants, intellectual giants. So really study the purpose of government as they imagined it. They created the most successful country in human history. We should figure out why and how. That's a model for us. And then I think integrate that with Rand's philosophy. I think that is what is needed and necessary. And the focus should always be, how do we allow individuals to make their own lives better? I can't make your life better. I can create an environment, circumstances where you can make your life better. And that's what political thinkers need to do. They create the circumstances in which individuals can then go out and pursue their own happiness and achieve their own values and make their life the best that it can be.
Beautiful. Dr. Brook, where can we find you online?
YouTube, I have a daily podcast. So I do a podcast every day about the news, about what's going on in the world. So YouTube, you can always also find me on my website, yaronbrookshow.com, yaronbrookshow.com. And then on Twitter, my favorite of the social media platforms, that's my favorite. So just Yaron Brook on Twitter, and those are the places. But YouTube is where I produce the most content.
Fantastic. Sir, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.